Something we've talked about all the time, sleep and mental health are linked. We know that from experience. Dr. Joe Ogile is on the phone with us now from Clayton Sleep Institute, which Wendy and I recently visited. Dr. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning, Jennifer. Good morning, Wendy.
Hi there.
We were shocked at a recent survey that said 3/4 of adults say they don't get enough sleep. What's enough sleep?
Well, for most of us, again, it's varies by age, but for most of us, it's about 7.5 hours, 7 hours, 40 minutes. There's a wide variation when you look at individuals, but that's kind of the basic starting point. And you'd be right when you say most people aren't getting enough sleep.
Is it even, as Jennifer said, younger people, is this just part of the human condition, Dr. Ogile? And obviously you're working to reverse this problem, but it does seem so widespread. It's like we know what to do, but we don't know how to do it.
That's such an interesting way to phrase it. So it is widespread. Part of it, especially in young people, we think about young people, right? When we're young, we feel that we're bulletproof. There was that mantra. There's still a mantra, right? You can sleep when you're dead. And so young people especially, they feel so good, and and they're able to recover so much easier than we are when we're older. And so that has been kind of baked into our culture for many, many years, many decades. And when you study young people, for instance, in college and NCAA athletes and so forth, they're getting an astounding lack of sleep, even at those levels. And this carries through to the high schoolers. It carries through to young people in their 20s. They're busy working hard, starting families, or out socializing. And sleep does not, for many of them, appear to have a high priority. And we use the phrase, we need people to choose sleep. I mean, sleep ultimately becomes a choice. And getting people to do that is a challenge. So we certainly have a higher level of awareness now, but it doesn't mean that we've turned the tide to making it better.
And Dr. Joe, if somebody finds themselves wide awake at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when they've been asleep for a few hours, what should they do? Should they get up out of bed and do something else, or stay there and count sheep, breathe, whatever?
Yeah, if you're up for, say, 15 to 20 minutes and you're not able to get back to sleep, we usually counsel folks, first of all, waking up at night, as you know, it's normal. About every 90 minutes you cycle through, and you will wake up even if you don't remember it. But then if you can't get to sleep, we suggest people get up, stay quiet and calm. It's a great time to meditate, pray. We have a lot of people who do the rosary at that time, things that are meditative. Don't get on your phone. Don't get on your computer. Don't check your email. You can also listen to something that's calming. There's actually a site called Boring Books for Sleep.
That's right. You told us about this. This is great.
That is great.
They read old books to you from the 18 and 1900s that are off copyright. And I've had friends who have done this. It's very much helped them. They've learned all about the postal system in Europe. They've learned about the train gauges in Germany. And it does get them to sleep. So
that is fantastic. Can you please ask Dr. Ogile, sometimes in the same work week, I need to wake up at 2:30 a.m. and other days I may not clock out until 11 p.m.
That's the worst.
Should I quit my job?
Oh, well, this humble practitioner is not going to weigh in on that. But that is a very, very difficult schedule that's being described, and there's not an easy countermeasure to that. So a person that's doing that probably deserves at a minimum to talk to their regular doctor or get a sleep consultation. If for anything else, to lay out in writing what their schedule actually is, when their allotted sleep times are, see if something can be done to have a countermeasure to that. And then those sort of personal decisions about the future of your employment, that potentially can be done in the context of that evaluation. Commenting further, it would be a bit inappropriate because some people, they can rally to that kind of job. They have biology that makes them resistant to sleepiness. Not many of us, but some of us. So Boy, that's a challenging work schedule, to say the least.
Why do some of us talk in our sleep?
Ooh. So, first of all, for many people, just speaking in your sleep occasionally is not any sort of disorder. It's just an observation. For some reason, the brain allows the motor, meaning the muscles, to be activated when normally they would not be activated. So the things that you're dreaming about or thinking about, and again, they may not be rational. So if people say things in their sleep that are maybe offensive to another person, or say bad language or things like that, it doesn't mean that that's what that person's really about, right? And so, but it's just that you're supposed to be paralyzed in that way, and they, for whatever reason, aren't. And it can happen. It's quite common, actually.
From the 314, our pediatrician told our son to go over his social studies book to help him go back to sleep, which I thought was really funny. And then, Dr. Ojal, could you share some tips on beating jet lag?
Oh, that is the worst.
That's fun, right? So what you want to do is figure out where the time zone you're going to. There's science to that, right? So if you're going to go from here to, say, Paris, which I think most radio people do on a regular basis.
Every weekend. Every weekend.
So if you're going to do that, then they're like 7 hours ahead. So they're going to be going to sleep, a few hours from now, maybe 5 or 6 hours. So they're going to go to sleep earlier than we are. So you want to go to sleep, say, in the days prior to your trip. You want to try to go to bed earlier, 3 to 4 days before you leave. Move your bedtime forward 30 minutes to an hour each of those days. That's a great time to use melatonin, by the way, low-dose melatonin. Take about 1 to 3 milligrams about 90 minutes before you want to get to sleep. So you can move your bedtime forward, say, 2, 3, 4 hours before you ever leave on your trip. So going east, that's the way to do it. And that can be very helpful. It's having the discipline to do that becomes a challenge, and the ability. I mean, some people they can't work that into their schedule.
Dr. Ojal, I think everybody knows that alcohol and caffeine can interrupt sleep. What about the foods we eat close to bedtime? Is that an old wives' tale, or can the food you ingest affect your sleep?
They certainly can affect your sleep. So high sugar foods and high fat containing foods can be sleep disruptive. And so we suggest that folks, a little light snack and sort of a protein dense snack right before bed. That's kind of a nice thing if you have to have a snack at bedtime. But certainly you wouldn't want to have, a heavy sugar laden ice cream or a piece of cake right as you're going to bed. That tends to be more disruptive and metabolically disruptive to people.
And what about exercise before bed? I always think, anecdotally anyway, that cardio wakes people up.
So that's been our advice. That's a great question, Jennifer, because that's been our advice, and it continues to be our advice to avoid exercise right before bed. But there have been some studies that have been counter to that suggested for some people they are able to exercise in the evening or later in the evening, and it doesn't really affect their sleep. So I think people need to figure out their own for themselves, their own personal biology. For most people, we tell them to try to avoid exercise, especially like kind of higher intensity exercise in the 3 hours or so prior to bedtime. But it isn't an absolute. And then, of course, low-level exercise can be helpful, like taking a walk in the evening, things like that, and try to calm you and burn off a little bit of energy can be quite helpful. So, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I just think that that issue's interesting because there has been some movement on that recommendation that was a little counterintuitive in the last few years.
ClaytonSleep.com, their new campus on Tesson Ferry is something that you really need to see. Dr. Ojal, is there a hereditary or a heredity component when it comes to sleep issues?
There is. I mean, there's on the first one that we talk about frequently, of course, insomnia has some heredity component. It is more common in women than men. And there are people who their families all had poor sleep quality or sleep issues that can frequently happen. The other one that we talk about frequently, people with obstructive sleep apnea. The back of their throats, of course, are just a little bit too small. And it's actually a medical diagnosis, family history of sleep apnea, because if mom or dad have it, then you're at higher risk to have it. And if you have it, of course, we want people to know that their children could have some higher risk. So in this day and age of preventive health, knowing that you or your spouse have sleep apnea, if your children are either having trouble in school, paying attention, they're having behavioral issues, one of the things to think about is that sleep-deprived or tired young child, their symptoms are identical to those of a person with ADD. And so getting a sleep study in a young person can be a very valuable part of that evaluation.
Dr. Ojai, if you hear people, and Martha Stewart has said this, that she only needs 4 hours of sleep a night. When you hear people say that, do you believe it? Are there such people?
There are such people, but they are relatively uncommon. So woe be it from me to sort of disagree with someone in a public way, someone who's making a public statement like that. And she may have won the biology award of life, right, by that being the case. But for the vast majority of people that we all know, there may be only a few who can exist on less than 6 hours sleep appropriately and healthily. Most of us, the vast majority, need to get in the sleep recommendations, which you can see on the National Sleep Foundation's website and so forth, that talk about the age-related average sleep. So a very small percentage of people can exist on less than 6 hours sleep, and a very small percentage of people, believe it or not, need more than 9 hours sleep.
Wow. You can call the Clayton Sleep Institute at 314-645-5855 or go to claytonsleep.com. Dr. Joe Ojai, a pleasure as always. Thank you.
Thank you, and you all have a great week.
Thank you, Doctor.